China just made the biggest military mistake in decades, and the whole world will feel the consequences. Chinese naval forces intercepted American destroyers in the Taiwan Strait, including the lethal USS Ralph Johnson armed with Tomahawk missiles. Beijing thought it was showing strength. In reality, they just signed their own geopolitical death warrant. The US didn't stand still. The response was so brutal and effective that military analysts are calling it the moment that changed the balance of power in the Pacific forever. Beijing completely underestimated what the Americans were capable of doing, and now it's too late to turn back. Get ready to find out how a decision made in just a few minutes turned China from predator into prey, and why this may be the beginning of the end of Chinese domination in the South China Sea. To understand the magnitude of what we're witnessing, we need to dig into the details of this specific operation. On April 24, 2025, Chinese naval and air forces were mobilized to monitor and warn the American destroyer USS Ralph Johnson as it sailed through the Taiwan Strait. According to the Eastern Theater Command of China's People's Liberation Army, they followed and monitored the entire passage of the U.S. ship, acting in a legal and effective manner. But here's the detail that most people missed. This operation lasted a full 3 days, way longer than the usual passages that generally take just a single day. The official American explanation is that there was a research vessel collecting oceanographic data, but military analysts suspect there was a lot more going on behind this prolonged operation. The USS Ralph Johnson destroyer is no ordinary vessel. This 9,200-ton war machine carries an impressive arsenal. 96 vertical launch cells capable of firing Tomahawk missiles with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers, plus Aegis missile defense systems considered some of the most advanced in the world. When the Chinese decided to intercept this ship, they knew exactly what they were up against. Senior Colonel Shi Yi, spokesman for the Chinese command, didn't mince words. He harshly criticized the United States for what he called provocation, and made it clear that China would no longer tolerate these incursions into its claimed territorial waters. The Chinese response included J-16 fighter jets, Type 052D surface ships, and DF-21D coastal missile systems, a coordinated display of military power rarely seen in the region. What makes this incident even more significant is the context in which it happened. This was just the first of several American naval operations in the region in 2025, coinciding with Donald Trump's return to the presidency and a fundamental shift in U.S. strategy for the Indo-Pacific. China isn't just watching anymore, it's actively reacting to every American move with military precision that has impressed international analysts. Recently, in September 2025, military ships from Canada and Australia were also monitored as they crossed the strait, showing that Beijing has expanded its surveillance to include all U.S. allies. The numbers show how intense this escalation is. In 2024, there were 12 American ship passages through the Taiwan Strait. Just in the first 8 months of 2025, there have already been 15 similar operations, a 45% increase that reflects growing U.S. assertiveness in the region. Every passage is now met with a Chinese response that involves up to 20 military aircraft and 8 warships simultaneously. Chinese state media has been clear. The People's Liberation Army is on high alert and ready to crush any provocation. These aren't empty words. They represent a fundamental shift in China's military strategy for the region, backed by a defense budget that hit record numbers in 2025. China's determination when it comes to Taiwan can be measured in dollars and cents. In March 2025, China announced a 7.2% increase in its military budget, raising official spending to $246 billion, the second largest military budget in the world. But experts at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimate that actual spending reaches $318 billion when undeclared military programs are included. This massive investment directly translates into military capabilities in the Taiwan Strait, where Beijing can mobilize more than 400 military aircraft and 120 warships within hours. The contrast with Taiwan is brutal. Even though Taiwan has boosted its military budget to more than 3% of GDP in 2025, representing 22% of the central government's budget, that still only adds up to around $19 billion a year. China spends the equivalent of Taiwan's entire GDP on defense every 3 months. To grasp why these naval incidents have the potential to change the course of world history, we need to go back in time and understand the deep roots of this conflict. Taiwan's history is an epic saga of conquests, colonization, and political twists that shaped the fate of 23 million people. Taiwan was discovered by the Portuguese in the 16th century, who called it Ilha Formosa because of its stunning natural beauty. But it was the Dutch who first established effective colonial control, followed by the Spanish in the north of the island between 1626 and 1642. The real transformation began when Taiwan became part of the Qing dynasty's Chinese Empire in 1683. For centuries, Taiwan remained a relatively isolated province of Imperial China. But everything changed dramatically in 1895 after China's defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. Through the Treaty of Tientsin, Taiwan was ceded to Japan as war indemnity, beginning a 50-year period of Japanese rule that completely transformed Taiwan's infrastructure and society. The Japanese built railroads, ports, schools, and hospitals in Taiwan, laying the foundation of the island's modern infrastructure. Ironically, it was during this colonial period that Taiwan developed many of the traits that today make it a global tech powerhouse. This forced modernization left Taiwan with a unique identity, distinct from both mainland China and Japan itself. But when we jump forward to 1949, we see a turning point that explains all the current tension. When World War II ended in 1945, Taiwan was returned to Chinese control after 50 years of Japanese rule. But just 4 years later, something extraordinary happened. The Chinese Civil War between communists and nationalists ended with Mao Zedong's victory and the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek fleeing to Taiwan. This wasn't just a government running away, it was the complete transfer of a republic to an island. More than 1.2 million mainland Chinese, including soldiers, civil servants, intellectuals, and businessmen, migrated to Taiwan between 1945 and 1955. They didn't just bring people, they brought China's national treasury, full government archives, and even the gold reserves of China's central bank. The government that set up in Taiwan kept calling itself the Republic of China, while the communist regime on the mainland established the People's Republic of China. Since then, Taiwan has considered itself the real China, while Beijing sees the island as a rebel province that must be reunited. This unique situation created one of the most complex geopolitical tensions of the modern world. For decades, Taiwan lived under martial law, holding on to the fiction that it would eventually retake control of the mainland. But the transition to democracy in the 1980s and 1990s fundamentally changed the nature of this dispute. Taiwan built a vibrant democracy, became a global tech powerhouse, and developed a distinct national identity that goes beyond the divide between mainland Chinese and native Taiwanese. China's official stance couldn't be clearer. Taiwan is a Chinese province that must eventually return to Beijing's control, preferably by peaceful means, but by other means if necessary. This is not negotiable for the Chinese Communist Party. It's an existential issue of political legitimacy. For leaders in Beijing, letting Taiwan remain de facto independent indefinitely would mean admitting there are limits to the central government's power and authority. That could encourage separatist movements in places like Hong Kong, Tibet, and Xinjiang. Unification with Taiwan is seen as the final step in the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, a core political goal of President Xi Jinping. On top of that, Taiwan holds a crucial strategic position in what Chinese military planners call the First Island Chain, a defensive line stretching from Japan to the Philippines. Controlling Taiwan would let China break through the American strategic encirclement in the Western Pacific and project naval power far beyond its coastal waters. With Taiwan under its control, China could extend its military influence into the Central Pacific, directly threatening vital trade routes and U.S. military bases across the region. For Beijing, reunification with Taiwan isn't just about national pride. It's a strategic necessity to become a true global superpower. But there's an even more urgent reason why Taiwan has become the epicenter of modern geopolitical tensions: semiconductors. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, TSMC, isn't just a business. It's literally the beating heart of the global digital economy. Founded in 1987, TSMC became the largest semiconductor manufacturer in the world and the first company to commercially produce 7 and 5 nanometer chips. But those technical numbers hide an astounding reality. In 2025, TSMC's revenue grew 39% in just the first 2 months of the year, hitting historic records of 2.96 trillion new Taiwan dollars in the first 7 months. To grasp the scale of this dominance, TSMC makes over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, including the processors that power iPhones, Tesla cars, US military gear, and artificial intelligence systems. Without TSMC, the AI revolution would simply grind to a halt. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, AMD, and Qualcomm depend entirely on Taiwan's manufacturing capacity. In 2025, TSMC launched mass production of 2-nanometer chips, the most advanced ever created, promising to transform the industry with higher performance and better energy efficiency. These chips are essential for everything from smartphones to cloud servers and military defense systems. Controlling TSMC would mean controlling the technological backbone of the 21st century. Across the Pacific, the United States finds itself in a delicate but strategically vital position. Even though Washington doesn't officially recognize Taiwan as an independent country, it maintains what diplomats call strategic ambiguity, a carefully calibrated policy that neither confirms nor denies whether the U.S. would militarily defend Taiwan in case of a Chinese invasion. The Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 requires the U.S. to provide Taiwan with defensive weapons and to consider any attempt to determine the island's future by non-peaceful means as a threat to peace and security in the Western Pacific. This law turned the U.S. into Taiwan's main military protector, even without a formal defense treaty. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2025 authorized up to $300 million in military aid for Taiwan, while just between October and November 2024, the U.S. approved $2.385 billion in arms sales to Taiwan, including advanced air defense systems and surface-to-air missiles. Taiwan has become the fourth biggest buyer of American weapons, behind only Israel, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, but with over $20 billion in pending deliveries since August 2024. This massive backlog includes dozens of F-16 fighters approved for saleback in 2019 and newly delivered HIMARS missile systems. U.S. support goes way beyond traditional military considerations. The U.S. is subsidizing TSMC's factory construction in Arizona with $6.6 billion, with the first unit starting 4-nanometer chip production in the first half of 2025. This is a clear attempt to reduce American dependence on Taiwanese semiconductor production, recognizing the strategic vulnerability created by the island's manufacturing monopoly. American naval operations in the Taiwan Strait, officially called Freedom of Navigation operations, are way more than routine exercises. They're carefully orchestrated political statements, each passage sending a clear message. The United States does not recognize China's territorial claims over these international waters. The Taiwan Strait is only 180 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but its strategic implications are massive. Over 50% of the world's container traffic passes through these waters, carrying goods worth more than $3.4 trillion annually. Any disruption in this trade route would immediately collapse global supply chains. For China, every U.S. ship that sails through represents a violation of its territorial sovereignty and a public humiliation broadcast live to 1.4 billion Chinese through state media. For the United States, these are necessary demonstrations that they will not be intimidated by China's growing military threats. The frequency of these operations has risen sharply in recent years. During Trump's first presidency, 24 Freedom of Navigation operations were carried out in the Taiwan Strait. Under Biden, that number jumped to 36. With Trump's return to the presidency in 2025, the first signs suggest this number could climb even higher. China's reaction to these operations has evolved dramatically over the years. At first, Beijing limited itself to formal diplomatic protests and distant shadowing. Today, every U.S. passage is met with a coordinated military response showing off impressive mobilization and coordination abilities. China has developed what military analysts call controlled escalation, proportional but unmistakable military responses that show capability without crossing the line into direct confrontation. This strategy lets Beijing flex its muscles without triggering a disproportionate U.S. military reaction. The April 2025 incident perfectly illustrates this new Chinese approach. The monitoring of the American destroyer wasn't just a surveillance operation. It was a choreographed demonstration of China's military power. This response was the biggest Chinese military show of force in the Taiwan Strait since the 1996 exercises, when China test-fired ballistic missiles near Taiwanese ports. The next chapters will be written in the rough waters of the Taiwan Strait, where decisions made in seconds can determine the fate of billions of people. History teaches us that sometimes the biggest conflicts start with the smallest incidents in places most people can't even find on a map. The Taiwan Strait, with its 180 kilometers of turbulent waters, may very well determine whether the 21st century will be remembered for global cooperation or for a superpower rivalry that defines humanity's destiny. One thing's for sure, the whole world will be watching every move in these waters that may decide not just who controls the Western Pacific, but who leads the world order in the decades to come. The game has begun, and the stakes have never been higher.